Donated to them back in Southern Maine, but they had like a 5,000 gallon tank.
Oh. Part of January. Yeah. When you go ahead and pledge it. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. For those of you who are joining us by Zoom, please mute your devices, like you wish to see. And the first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of January the 5th. Are there any questions or omissions in the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor? Thank you for coming in all city, right?
Yeah. Don't worry.
And we have payroll warrant number 30 for $29,856.39.
So,
Are there any questions on payroll warrant 30? Hearing none, all those in favor? Well, that's a lot of paperwork, I thought it had. And we have AP warrant number 31 for $77,018.47.
so,
Are there any questions on warrant number 31? Hearing none, all those in favor?
that's okay.
Selectmen's report, Danny.
I have nothing.
Rob.
A couple of things. Sorry.
No.
I just note on two things. We need to put the transfer station operation out to bid and roadside mowing. I don't know if we want to get that done before the budget committee meets or not, but probably should.
Yeah.
Might be good to do that. Are we still planning to do the budget presentations from the department heads to the plant, to the select board first? And then to the budget committee, or do as a joint workshop?
I think probably my guess is you help me here, even join the workshop, but usually the department heads come to the town manager, and the town manager and the department heads bring it to the board and.
The budget committee. We
Budget.
usually go to the budget committee first. And I've had a couple of meetings with Larry Peterson and Deb Bisson early on, talking about how they would like to do the process this year. And I haven't heard back from them, and I sent Dwight a note, and I haven't heard back from him. So I don't know the answer to that tonight, but the typical process is we go to the budget committee first, and then the board, but I know we had talked about the other way last
Yeah.
year, because they had some concerns, so.
They had some concerns and I've seen it in the past, not that I dislike any of their procedures that they've done on the budget committee, but I guess I think the select board should be setting the priorities, and then the budget committee tells us how to do it, or what we should or shouldn't do.
Well, I think that was something they definitely wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because, the budget committee sort of made the recommendation, as an example, the police chief did hire another police officer, and then came up afterwards, and I think that was backwards. I just think that we should be making that policy
Absolutely.
decision for the town, and then the budget committee tells us how we can fund it around it.
I would agree with that. And I think it's important when he hears back from the people that early on,
I guess it's fine.
I'll get to you. Early on, we have a Jones meeting.
Sure.
Right,
That was the only thing I was going to suggest, have a departmental presentation to the joint committee, so we all have the same answers, or have the same questions. It's wiser that way, safer.
we all have the same question. We'll never really happen.
But I think, I like the idea because it can set, I think one of the things that they had said last year was that it would give them an inclination of what, in the direction that we want to go, and they're not spinning their wheels on fighting something that they don't want, but yet the board wants.
Right.
So we don't have to run back and forth, but I'd like to the board.
And that's kind of the way I felt with some of the things that went on last year and previous years, that you guys kind of decided what was happening in the town, and we found out later. It's not.
Yeah, well, I think joint is the best. way to
Yeah.
go.
Absolutely. So let's figure on setting that up.
yes, got it.
Anything else?
Yeah, I had somebody question me the other day, and I'm glad Ray's here, about the transfer station reserve, and I don't know if we have any reserve funds in there, and I don't remember seeing what the balance was.
So,
We have a solid waste to do, account.
Oh, solid waste.
We changed the name a couple of years ago. I think that's what you and I talked about, 24,000 in there,
how much?
24 is what you told me? Yeah, 24.
Okay, good. And I just, one other thing I've noticed in the past, it's been a good 6 months probably, the Trap the Treasures program, there's been no activity there other than a tremendous buildup of materials. And I mean, there's piles and piles of rope and buoys and traps everywhere, and I don't know if they plan on coming back or doing anything. We're gonna leave that for us to clean out, but
Well, I'm assuming they're still active. I have talked to Buzzy there sometime this summer. Maybe I could suggest if he,
I actually did speak to him last week,
Oh.
and I put a newsletter.
I saw it.
And he said they're still active in there. I don't know if he hasn't been for a short amount of time or not, but he said they're still doing the same thing they were doing before. He also said they are running out of room, so I'm, but I feel like if I can hear from him more, maybe he could come and tell us what his plan is, or I can
Yeah.
even call him again.
I mean, he doesn't have to come before us. I just want to make sure that something's still going on there.
Yep, he said it's
Just
still.
seems like the
it's still-
piles are growing and
Yeah.
I mean, the last couple of weeks, the doors have been wide open on his building and nobody around it, so I don't know what was going on over there. So. Okay. That's all I have. All right, long list.
so by consensus, put those two bids out earlier, so
I would think so. You hopefully get somebody to bid on and
very great. Then you go, I have nothing to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have anything other than I agree with the budget process because I went to a lot of budget meetings last year. And there was a lot of comments about they wanted some direction from the select board, so.
Work together.
Yeah.
Peter. Treasurer's report.
Okay, your bills tonight. excuse me, after our bills tonight, here is $1,738,065. Last year was $1,497,061. The year before it was $1,493,726. I also prepared a December expense report, and I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, but I'm happy to report that all the departments, it should be at 50%. There is one that's 49.8, but they're all under the 50, so that's it. They've been doing a really good job keeping their budgets together, so,
Yeah, I didn't see any surprises in there.
Questions of the treasurer?
it's doing great. They're doing great.
Thank you, Amy. Committee report. Michael.
Well, like all, I got a few things. First off, the lab, we got another Moose Moss grant for another intern for the coming summer. And actually, we have a high school student. They think is gonna work with us most of the summer. Bill's reaching out to the school again to see if we can get other students to come down and work with us on the project. The next thing is, we just signed a letter of intent with DEI. They're doing another project. They're submitting a grant to do a project in the town of Gooseboro, where the town would end up with 148,000 clams, and they're trying a new experiment where they grow them in what we call a heel box on the flats. And they're trying to plant them after green crabs. Green crabs settle in June and July. So they timed their plantings of these clams on the flats, so presumably after that happens, to see if we can head off the green crabs. Because last year when we took our trays out, we had an awful lot of green crabs. And they're the #1 predator to soft shell clams. The next thing that I want to say is that the Fisherman's Forum is the first Thursday and Friday in March, and the first day is Clam Day. And that's where they get shellfish committees and speakers. Bill Zolik and I are going to do a panel discussion on the project in Gooseboro along with Lou Beck. And there's somebody else that's going to be on that panel. I can't remember who he is. And then Pauline is also going to be on a panel later on shore access, because everybody's interested in what Gooseboro is doing. If you remember right, we just entered into an agreement with Island Institute for climate change. So those are the things that that she's going to be talking about. We've already started having people calling up to book tours to the lab for the summer coming. So people really know about Gooseboro and the project that we've got going there. And finally, for shellfish, Bill and I have been invited to speak over to the College of the Atlantic. Dr. Chris Peterson is one of the professors that we work with. He's on the Bar Harbor Shellfish Committee. And we're actually doing work within Frenchman's Bay, which would be his group, the 7 towns, and Gooseboro. And we will have another meeting on that this spring to compare the notes on the work that we did in each of our respective communities. The next thing is the Harbor Committee. We had a very, I feel, productive Harbor Committee meeting last night. We talked about definitions and moving forward. We're trying to get something ready for this year's town meeting. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Monty. Yes. Thank you, with all of your partners for the incredible work you've done with the Shellfish Committee and the lab. I see on a daily basis in the summertime, and the amount of interest is incredible. It's a great thing. Somebody want to check?
No, I just want to say, I did a tour of the lab last year, and I thought it was fantastic what you're doing down there, and I think, keep up the great work. We love seeing it. I love seeing it. So I love seeing the community involvement that's been with you.
The other committee report. Police Department, Chief.
Good evening. We had 48 calls since the beginning of the year, ranging anything from property checks to domestic assault arrests. We're staying busy. Winter time doesn't change anything that we do. Sometimes it's just different, but everyone seems to be doing pretty well. Yes, sir.
Was Landon able to get to the academy?
Landon's in the academy now. Good. So everybody say a prayer for him. We're gonna develop a new model, a motto of faith, hope, and love.
And thank you for all the good work you've done. Fire department,
Just the infant.
everything's good.
You got it.
Thank you.
Jim.
Super. We have no EMS then.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah.
I don't have no list.
I'll put it back on, sorry about that.
Okay. Anyway, we know you guys have been busy too, and thank you for all you do. We appreciate it, everybody. Superintendent of Town Infrastructure is not with us tonight, but he sent us a couple letters.
We did send a report, the report is away and the next week. He asked that it be read, but it's up to you if you want it read or not.
I think the opening remarks should be read.
Okay? To the select board, I would like to convey my deepest heartfelt condolences to the most honorable select person Mitchell. May he find peace in my absence to the select board.
Amen.
There's something going on.
And then he goes on to say what he's done all the past couple of weeks. So been really busy too, I know he will.
He's been very busy.
You don't have that?
No.
I do. Oh,
Town manager report.
okay, so hot off the press, our June 22 audit. Is available, was available, I just got it this past week, and so it was in your packets. This year we had James Wadman, and it was a pure pleasure to work with him. And I really want to say a shout out of thanks to Alita Fusco, our treasurer. She helped so much with it, there's so much to get prepared, and she did an excellent job. I'm happy to report we have a surplus of $1,273,360. Which is, it exceeds the threshold of the 2 months. That's like $1,050,000. So a couple $100,000 more than, not more than we need, but at least we're in a good spot with having enough. Should we get COVID or something again and have to use them. Let's see, fireworks ordinance, it's a draft. I put it in your packets. Roger Bowen passed it along to me. I'm kind of waiting now for the official petition that he's about to prepare and get to me in anticipation to bring it to the town meeting. And well, we already talked about the budget, so that's all.
Question with town manager. Thank you, Reed. And we have nothing under old business, under new business. Philip Forrest, Bob DeCarter. Bob.
It's not named after me. Great to see everyone. Thank you for having us here. Again, I'm Bob DeForest. I'm with Nathan's Heritage Trust. And this is Tatia Bauer. And Tatia with Nathan's Heritage Trust, who's our steward for the property and oversees the Scudic Forest property. So this property, if you may recall, this is part of the larger piece that was the Modena property, which was approximately a total of 3,200 acres north and south of 186, abutting the Scudic district of Acadia National Park. And it was purchased by Critic Woods LLC, and with the purpose of conserving it and to work on building the campground and doing the southern portion south of 186 to the National Park Service and to conserve the northern portion. And so they've owned it since about 2011 when they acquired it, and have been spending the past few years sorting out some of the boundary, there's some encroachment, so wanting to be good neighbors, going and talking to the neighbors and dealing with some surveying the property and dealing with some encroachments and working on setting the boundary before giving it to, donating it to Maine Coast Heritage Trust back in December of 2020. And so we're here, we wanted to just provide an opportunity to provide a map to everyone and to answer any immediate questions you might have about the property or ownership. And then we plan on going to having a few public meetings that will advertise and hold public meetings on the peninsula for people to provide input about the property and for us to kind of talk about it. But the one thing I'd like to do is that we've owned it for a year and we've been getting to know the property. And part of that is we spent the first year doing a short-term management plan. So Tapia put in a kiosk, if you've been in there. And how many people are familiar with sort of where this property is? You can see it on the map, but so the Curtis Road, which is just east of the Winter Harbor Water District property. And you can see that's the blue property is the Water District property. If you may recall, that's a property we bought a conservation easement on back in around 2008 or so. And, or sorry, a little bit later than that, but we purchased that to provide some funding for the water district to do infrastructure improvements. And so they used that $300,000 and put it in towards improving their infrastructure that was needed at the time. But it also put a conservation easement, so all the development is limited to the area around the standpipe and the old pump house, which is that driveway that's south of 186 and right on Birch River Pond. So we've acquired the more than 1,700 acres, and that goes all the way up to from 186 up to the Winter Harbor line. It's bordered in the northwest by Mill Stream, and then it goes to the east to the Winter Harbor Gouldsboro line again. And there, if you look at the map that I sent you, you can see that there are two parcels that extend from the property and continue easterly and come out on the pond road. And so one up to the north is just south of Dave Seward's land is that northern piece before you come to the first house that's coming down. And then the south, there's the Woods Road that extends and it goes up there. It's pretty worn out from erosion over the years, but that extends and gets up on the property. So the purpose of the gift was, you may recall back in 1996 that there was concern when the Modena family was looking to do the timber harvest back then and the impact that would have on the park. So at that point, there were communications with the owners and they ended up doing sort of strip cuts back then. Fast forward to when the eco resort was proposed, there was added interest in seeing, worry about that overdevelopment, that property would isolate the peninsula as sort of this ecological island. And so wanting to make sure that all the bear, moose, and other bobcat and other animals that migrate up and down the peninsula are still connected to that piece. So they protected the southern by giving it to the Park Service and creating a campground. The northern piece, they donated to us for the purposes of protecting the ecology of the property, providing recreational opportunities. And I know Nicholas Kelly is on Zoom right now, and this is in partnership with Studic Institute, who will be partnering on education and research on the product. The Maine Coast Heritage Trust is an owner of it, but Studic Institute has already started to do research projects on it, looking at the forestry and looking as it relates to climate change. So we view this as an opportunity to provide opportunities for education. And when we held the meetings back in, I think it was back all the way back to 2011, 12, there are meetings, over at Hammond Hall to talk about the bigger property. A lot of the conversations were on the southern portion, but that northern portion, there were comments about wanting to have that opportunity to provide educational opportunities for the schools, for kids to get in there, and wanting to have that still remain open for hunting and other activities. So we're in the process of figuring out who uses the property. Tati has been in there and has been, what you described, sort of your visits to the property.
Yeah, I remember I only run into, a few people here and there. It's easy to get lost and it's easy to miss people, but, I can install a kiosk and put my number and email out there to get folks to get in touch with me to see what they, what they really enjoy about the property, that we can keep that, available, and what, needs to change and that kind of thing. Haven't gotten too much feedback. I know most people go in there and either hunt to kind of run their dog in some of the open fields in the back, if you know the one I'm talking about. And, I've met some people who sight their rifle and stuff in that open field too. So, that's kind of the uses that I see, and I'd love to hear from anyone who uses it in those ways or any other ways. As we go through our process of trying to develop our management plan, which basically just sets the stage for the next 5 years and how we're gonna treat the property and what measures we're gonna take. So, yeah, I know lots of,
There's also, I know ATV used to go on through there.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's a network of trails that extend up to the north towards, off of it to the gravel pit, and off the northwest extend forward, and then some ATV traffic that goes easterly into the Goldsboro as well. And actually utilize in some places utilizing the cleared Goldsboro Winter Harbor line there, to go through. So those are things that we're looking to talk to the people that use it in that way. We have to be thinking about the way that it, the impacts of that, and also just the upkeep as far as any road maintenance and things like that cost, and wanting to make sure that there's not issues like runoff in the streams and things like that. So those are the questions those are the conversations we'd like to have with people. And like I said, we'll do some public meetings, but this was an opportunity for, if the select board had any questions, or people in the room had specific questions about the property, to start that conversation.
Are there any board questions? Any public? Audience questions or Zoom questions? Nobody responded on Zoom. I wouldn't make about this. The only thing I'd say, Bob, is thank you very much. We've known you guys for a long time, and thank you for all the outreach that you put out there, and we're looking forward to being good neighbors and working together for a long time.
Great, I appreciate that. And Tatsuya said, one of the questions that has come up in past conversations, and we heard that over at Cannon Hall, is the property tax question. And so I met with the Winter Harbor Select Board last night. So we're planning, we've raised enough funds to pay the taxes that are on it now. So there'll be a payment in lieu of taxes. So it'll be for tax exemption, but there'll be a payment in lieu of taxes that are equivalent to the current tax rate for the property.
Thank you, Bob. And I think that should probably tie into the next meeting a little bit there, and come to conversation. Quick claim deed release.
Another one of these we had one last meeting as well. This one has formally foreclosed, but when the lien was released, it was released 6 months too late. Had to be released within the foreclosure time period, and they were in fact paid before that. So it was an oversight in the staff at the time. And I attached that information for you as well. So.
Entertain a motion to sign it.
Move we sign this claim deed.
All in favor?
Thank you.
Everybody. Can't make sure it's not my property.
It's probably a good idea. No. I was looking to see it myself.
Paul, make sure his.
And it looks like we need to have a conversation about a new cost here. I can't imagine one is gonna have that one for 25 or 30 years.
So we actually have a contract of the copier we have now, and it's due to expire pretty soon. But Brianna has done a lot of legwork on what we should do next, if we should continue or not. And she's spoken to the gentleman that represent that company, and I provided some information, or she provided some information for you. She's here to tell you all about her new copyright.
Make your pitch.
So, as you said, our copy release will be coming out this year. When we went to the MMA convention back in October, this printer company was there and I was like, oh, let's talk to them and see what we can get for information. So, I did get a quote, as you have in your packet. It's gonna be a lot cheaper in the long run, with this new company. The printer we have now does not do bifold or bifold, and this new copier will. But also Transco is just not a very friendly company to work with, so looking to switch companies, and I've heard really good things about this company, and hopefully, I don't know, hopefully it will work.
You have a number?
Yeah, so, right now we're spending $379, on our monthly lease amount. But if we stay with Transco, and renew our contract, they did say it will be going up. So, it really wouldn't make sense to stay with them for the same kind of copier to go up in price, when we can go down in price for a copier that's better and will do more. So the new price would be $329.89. They did say it may go up about $30. But that's what I got.
Good work.
Yeah.
Need a motion, question?
And will we, go forward with the replacement copy?
Second.
And actually, you didn't discuss the monthly maintenance fee that's on that too, so it saves us about $200 a month, a little over $200 a month. So.
Any other comment? All those in favor? Good job. Town report, member statement.
So I provided, well, I know that report, and then you usually like to choose who you would like to include as, for memory pages, and we've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think that's pretty gonna be 5 or 6. It's usually someone who is gonna be in the community, but
I was gonna state for one, the Jim Watson, we've been a member of the board for a long time.
Look,
Yeah.
Remember it well.
My chagrin, Bob Johnson.
Yes.
Oh, yes, Bob
Absolutely,
Johnson.
Bob
Yeah.
Johnson. And as we think about it, you don't need all the names tonight.
I don't, and I'll come back to you next time.
Yeah.
One I would like to recommend would be Leona Newman, and the reason why is she worked elections. I know that for at least 30 years, and I love at least second. So yeah, when I'm going to keep at least 4, and I'll bring it back next time.
Absolutely. Thank you. Small animal clinic complex.
So the contract we engage in with small and rural every year. And it's for, which someone's for, you don't know that.
Yeah, it's for those animals that we have no place to keep them for any length of time. Small animal clinic will take them at any hour of the day and night. We have a key that we can go in there and put the dog in, or the cat, and, it's pretty inexpensive when it comes down to, it's like $30-something a night, and I think that the most we've spent is $50, so. You know, they do a good job, pretty amazing.
Motion to enter into a new contract with the small animal clinic.
I'll make that motion.
Discussion. All those in favor? And we have shellfish member appointments to the shellfish committee, and recommended for 1 year. Names are Wayne Misco, David Denninger, Alan B. Church, Alan N. Church, and Mike Cronin. And I'm assuming that nobody else wants to jump up and volunteer.
I move we recommend those, we accept those members. Second.
All in favor? And we are at the point where public comment here before we go into the next section of our meeting. Is there any public comment? Can't believe it. Okay, now we're going to dedicate some time to a community housing workshop.
We need to wait till 6 o'clock. People think it has to start at 6.
What am I going to do for the next 20 minutes?
Kill the chairs.
Can you tell me some stories?
You're kind of.
I know you wouldn't be involved.
And we have Danny Singh.
No.
Yeah. The honorable Mitchell will entertain Well, let me, before we'll try to fill in some time here. This all started some years ago, town manager and I and several boards have talked about there is very little space for young people to build a house. We'll get started on the lifestyle. And we kicked it around for a long time. And this board sort of thought that it was a topic that we ought to have a discussion about. And we had Bob has been over, Bob the Forest has been over and talked to us. Somebody, he has some familiarity with it in other areas. And this meeting we're going to have in a few minutes here is no decisions are going to be made, but it's just to get some public comment, make public aware of the issue, and see what other areas have done. And I think it's a very good thing. It's a question that we all need to look at. Now it's somebody else's turn.
I'll jump in. You know, and we look at this because we've seen it from people. The schools tried to hire school teachers that haven't been able to find any housing in the area, so they've turned down the jobs. And I know we've had problems with people, even our own staff, not that they're underpaid, but at the current housing prices in Goldsboro, most of our current employees couldn't buy a house here. You know, I couldn't buy my house here right now. Going out to buy, I couldn't afford it. So, you know, that puts us in a real tough position. What do we do? And, you know, there's not a lot we can do, but there are some things we can do to help facilitate it to happen. And I'm concerned, I think, but most of the board is concerned that there aren't places for people to go and start. And how do we go about doing something with that?
Absolutely. You know, most of us are here and have been here for a long time, but it's the next generation we need to look at. You know, I'm sort of getting into the conversation where the meeting goes, but just to fill in the time, you know, the huge demand in the area, so I hear for nurses in the hospitals, for instance, and stuff like that, they have no sense. And just basic workforce. So anyway, we just think that it's a conversation that needs to be had. And hear all of the pros and cons and give it some thought and see if we go further and how we get there, and it's gonna take some time.
Dana,
Yes,
there's a little bit of history that might inform some of the ensuing. When Roger was on the board, they looked into workforce housing for Maine Fair Lobster, who was going to use the 20 acres behind to build housing, and a guy from, his name is Dana Little, did concrete housing for them in New Brunswick. And if people stayed there, they're workers, because they were having trouble getting workers here and staying afloat, haha. So, and if they stayed there 10 years in the, and rented for 10 years in those, that concrete housing, they owned the house. So there was a real incentive to have the workers stay. And just this week, there is information from a new type of housing. Concrete housing is not very climate friendly to make. So, you know, the guy that does the bridges and everything at Humane Biohome 3D, they're now making affordable housing. And there's a seminar, I think, the 26th of this month on that, which is probably the way this town would want to go. So, you know, there is a history to trying to do this. And why it didn't happen, there's some history behind that too.
the issue we've been kicked around. Hasn't been box going very close. The issue we've been kicked around for a long time, but just to re-emphasize that point, I think it's critically important that we have this conversation and see where it goes. I will say right up front. So my personal opinion is I don't think the town of Bluefield, I can only speak to the town of Bluefield, should be a landlord anyway. And as the meeting opens up, I think we're going to hear some different proposals on that. But the issue is critically important. Like that thing.
Well.
Jack, I didn't like that.
You can start back in a company. Just start it down.
That's what behavior. We'll be the grow here already. What's the day here, director?
I think, like we talked about turning the chairs down, so someone can figure out on and people won't be able to see them.
Yeah, you guys want to turn and face the
Yeah, so
music?
sort of flip, you're right.
Where would you like?
Jackie's idea to get down the chat around.
Well, then when we set up the screen this afternoon, that's correct. Just to turn the chairs around.
We can move the camera.
Yeah. Well, okay.
The director of development, the main houses in Augusta. Main housing authority is an independent authority within the state government that coupled with efficiencies of private financial markets and public purposes, goals to provide affordable home ownership and rental housing opportunities for people in Maine. And thank you very much, Matt, for being here and helping us facilitate.
Happy to be here, and I think you've already said everything I was gonna, so. I think we're done. My name is Mark Riesenberger. I'm the Director of Development of Maine State Housing Authority, Maine Housing. I oversee the department that funds pretty much all of the affordable housing that you say, affordable rental housing, right? And I'm not real sure what you're trying to do here, but I can give you some ideas about housing around the state, problems that we're seeing. I think what you're looking to do is create workforce housing, trying to keep younger folks here, trying to provide. You mentioned nurses a second ago, trying to find housing to encourage more people to live in the area.
That's part of it, yeah.
You know, and we're seeing this problem everywhere in the state. Housing is extraordinarily expensive right now. My wife and I live in South Florida. There's no way we could afford the house we live in right now. If we had to buy it today, it's just everything is changed. Rent go up, cost of homes are up. And you know, if you didn't get in at the right time, you might be in trouble right now. A number we've been throwing around for the last few years is 20,000 units. That's how many affordable housing units we think are needed in the state of Maine. We've changed that number a little bit. We're saying 25,000. I heard it was 49,000 within the last couple of days. It wasn't from us, but it was from a fairly reliable source, so I'm a little nervous about that. That said, we've been fortunate in the last couple of years to have more funding than ever available for creating new housing. The state and federal government have given us money. We have been fortunate in our own, Maine Housing is actually a $2 billion bank. We do a lot of bonding and lending, so we are able to create our own money. And by law, we have to put that, we have to put excess profit back into our projects. We're not allowed to just make tons and tons of money. We have to give it back. So we create soft money that we give away and put into our projects. Right now, because interest rates have gone up so much, we are not making so much money from our bond and lending activity. Unfortunately, luckily, the state and legislature, both sides of the aisle, seem very interested in giving us money. The governor just came out with a proposed budget. It included $30 million that will let my team to create more housing. And that number could go up, honestly. So that's that. We do have a few housing programs that may or may not work well in this area. In fact, I have a list of housing programs that might be of interest. And I'm happy to answer any questions. A big part of why I'm here is to hear what the issues are in the area. When we're creating new programs, we like to know what is happening around the state, make sure that we're covering all parts of the state. We're not just Portland housing or Caribou housing or P16R4. We're trying to help everybody out. So you being here, a lot of this is just me learning as well.
Can I have a question?
Sure.
Who normally are these partners with? Like, when you go into an area and you say, we're doing housing, you work with the state government, federal government, you work with the local government, how does that work?
Generally speaking, we put our programs out there and developers come to us looking for funding to help them with their projects. Especially right now when the cost of construction is so high, plus materials is so high. Folks cannot create new rental housing and keep their rents low and pay off the debt required to create that housing. So we have to subsidize those projects, and basically we have to give them free money in order for them to keep those rents low. Okay. And so that's our role. It's really up to developers to come to us and say, hey, we have an idea about a project. You want to build it here. This is what it looks like. This is how many units there are. If it fits within one of our programs, we just make sure that it fits within those programmatic requirements. as I was saying, some of these programs, we administer programs to both the state and federal government, depending on the resources that we're using, and so each one of those resources comes with all of these hoops. For lack of a better word, you have to jump through. And we're basically here to make sure that when we award a project, that those hoops and that we don't want to be overly dramatic, and sometimes we don't have a choice at all in what we're doing. I know we can be a little painful. I will. What's that?
So admitting.
I'm in the coverage.
I have don't want to, but I'll keep doing that because I lose my train of thought. Everybody in the room knows it, that doing it. What you described, we're very interested in. But I personally, and I think some other people are looking at a broader picture. So I think one of the needs for this community that I can think of, or a couple of the needs I can think this community or this area is there is a total lack of daycare for children in the area. And population is getting older. We have a few places in Winter Harbor where elderly people go, if they can live within their income. Does your department deal with that beyond just workforce housing or anything?
We don't create daycare centers, for instance. We might create an apartment building that has a space that's used as a daycare center. But we don't provide daycare, we don't create daycare centers. As far as older adults are concerned, I would say half of our housing is specifically for seniors and half of it for family. And, Maine's the oldest state in the nation, we have the oldest housing stock in the nation, so. We spend a lot of time trying to house our older adults in the state.
Absolutely.
Which is it's generally cheaper than family housing, it doesn't have to be durable, two bedroom, stuff like that.
And one of the things you mentioned is, I don't want to jump in ahead of anybody, but I envision this, if it down the road, if we get to it, it's going to involve an entity. I think that Bob and I had the discussion, Bob had the discussion with the board, but it's going to involve an entity to get the developer to do this. Whatever, I just don't see the average person on the street being want to say, I want to do all of this. It's going to take a developer and work together with Bob, the housing authority or any, did that cut you short? I didn't mean to.
Not at all, I'll tell them some gaps there.
Well, in our earlier conversation, you said you had some experience with this and the local housing and that was donated or what?
I think Marla is the person to speak to.
Okay. Anyway, Matt, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
You have any more information?
I do, and also I have business guides and happy to leave them when people can grab them if they have questions. And I also the link to our website, take a look and see if there are some programs that might work. Because they really, depending on the need, they really run the gamut of complexity, size, we have programs like the low income housing tax credit program, which is pretty well known. It's very complicated. If you're on experienced developer, you probably aren't going to get into it. It's for 40 units, it may not work. So we've seen that problem. Last year, we created a new rural affordable rental housing program, and that's for 5 to 18 units. And it doesn't come with all the hoops of the low income housing tax credit program. And less experienced developers can do it. People, a lot of folks have 2 or 3 units, why can't they go to 5? And it provides a lot of subsidy. We're well aware that in rural areas, you're probably not gonna have the scale to build a tax credit project. In the rural areas, the median income is usually way lower. And so, rents are gonna be, they have to be much lower. And so that only pays for so much tax. So this program has a lot of subsidy going into it. Basically, the deal is you tell us how much it costs to build units, how much income you're gonna get from rentals, how much it costs to operate the building, and we'll figure out what the number, you know, how much debt you can take on and how much subsidy you need to provide to make the project work. Pretty long term. In exchange, we expect that our developer partners are gonna maintain affordability for 45 years.
45 years.
You know, they can make a profit,
Yeah.
but it has to be reasonable. We're not gonna make anybody rich. We're definitely gonna check out, you know, the operations and the income on the property and make sure that, you know, we're not over subsidizing.
So how do you attract developers to develop some of this property? Say if you want senior housing here.
I would say that it's really more up to you folks. I mean, I can help put in touch with folks and things like that, but really it's up to the town or a developer to come here and say, I can do this for you. You know, certainly we can provide lists of folks that have successfully used our funding in the past. And we welcome to reach out to them directly. It's tougher in areas like this, but there are a lot of developers around, but it's not very close to other outlets. I know one of our developer partners who mostly works in the Portland area, built a project in Ellsworth. So I think things are coming up this way a little bit, slowly but surely. We also have a program called the Community Solutions Grant, which is funding that a municipality can apply for directly. And it's up to $500,000, I believe. I don't administer this particular program, but I can get you the information. It really is to be used for whatever a local community thinks they need to use it for. It has to be matched. And that doesn't necessarily mean, you know, if you borrow or receive $300,000, you don't necessarily have to have $300,000, but you're going to need to show in-kind donations at least. And that could be sweat equity or donated land, for instance. You know, what some towns do is they'll use the Community Solutions Grant, donate a piece of land, they'll use that grant to clean up the site and make it ready for a developer to come in and apply for one of our other programs and build a project on it. It's really, because most of our programs are so regimented and have such strict rules, the Community Solutions Grant is one of the most flexible things that we can do. And it's not necessarily geared directly to developers, it's really for the municipalities. Some folks have used it to start a small development department within the town. You know, maybe to fund a person for a year or two and maybe put some money aside to invest in a project. It's pretty interesting and very flexible.
So someone told me that you characterize this area as a difficult development area. And that is because.
It's difficult to develop there. It's not a super desirable place for developers.
We don't have water and sewer.
That's a factor as well, and we do, a lot of our programs are going to require that, and require that you meet the rules of the Maine Growth Management Act, which is not something I know very well. Our legal team certainly does. And so, when you're building a rural area and you have to provide a septic system and dig a well, you know, you're gonna want to use a more flexible resource. Some of them will not allow you to do that.
Can you give us an example of somebody like us that is septic system, this size, this rural?
This rural, not recently.
What would be the closest that we could look at?
You know, we're doing what's the figure, what's the population?
2,000.
2,000, well, it's not that small, I mean. Grew up in Richmond, it's about 3,000, we're building 2 projects there right now. Madison, Maine, which, well, I don't know where the population is, the mill closed, so I think sure. They have created a new housing agency. There's a nice little project going on there right now.
You said Madison?
Yep. Yep, up towards Skowhegan.
And what is the first thing with the solutions grant? What was the first part of that? I didn't catch it. It's a little hard hearing that.
Sorry,
It's okay.
it's up to $500,000 for municipality.
Yeah.
It requires a net. And that could be in-kind donations.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily have to be cash. And allows the community to use it for whatever it needs to use it for, to create affordable housing. It
But
could be
specifically for affordable housing.
just about everything in Maine housing is going to be for affordable housing. That said, we do have, a program which is called the Affordable Homeownership Program. But really, that program is for developers to build subdivisions and subsidize each individual unit. As long as they sell it within our price caps. And our price caps in Hancock County, I think, $287,000. And I don't know how far that goes these days here. I don't know if you can build something brand new in Hancock County and sell it for $287,000, 3-bedroom, 2 baths. Is that possible?
And what is this, called something solution grant?
Sorry, I was just talking about the Affordable Homeownership Program.
Oh, that's-
The program before is the Community Solutions Grant.
Okay.
I'm kind of all over the place with our programs. Like,
We have some people, right? You might want to introduce yourself to them, Betty and Steve.
Mark is in our main housing.
Oh, great. I think we spoke with Steve Dawson.
Sure, absolutely. Nice to see
Mark,
you.
I have a question. Obviously, you described one of the issues for rural or small community tackling this project. Obviously, Portland would be a much easier place to do this. I would assume. Is there any possibility of area towns coming together and supporting this and making it a little bit viable?
You know what, we had a few towns in Aroostook County talking about this at one point, and I'm not sure what came of it, other than Presque Isle started building affordable housing on their own. But there were a few towns that were talking about sharing resources, you know. Obviously, a small town can't afford to create a development officer position, you know, with benefits and everything, at $100,000 a year, or whatever it is. So, we thought about sharing a person. Smaller towns often, you know, will find an organization that's willing to own individual property, but they don't know anything about developing real estate. And so they'll work with a consultant partner who will, you know, require some sort of payment. But that can be a cost of the project. And they'll work with a specific person who will guide them through the process, help them get the funding, help them develop the project. And then when the project's done, it's handed over to the entity that's going to own and manage it in the long term. CAP agencies are often working in this realm. Local housing authorities, I don't think there's anything near here, maybe MDI, Ellsworth MDI. Which I was housing authority.
I think Coon County's community partner could be
Yeah,
maybe something interesting.
yeah, absolutely.
If something like that in Scotia, just given they know the area.
They do, and they've done this work before.
Right. Yeah, I think they just, if I remember correctly, they had some part in an affordable housing development in Ellsworth that opened recently. I mean, they were inspecting the units for them or something, but I think it could be interest from what I understand,
Yeah,
possibly being that entity.
and I know there are projects in Eastport, Machias, Millbridge, Calais. I mean, we have projects everywhere, but I'm not sure who is actively creating new housing. I do know Kevin Bunker recently completed, I think, 2 projects in Ellsworth. Which turned out very well.
Did you already touch on the tax credit program that we have in the governor again? Are they funded again? What's happening there?
So I didn't go into too much detail of the low-income housing tax credit because I'm not sure that you have the scale required around here to create a tax credit project
Right.
and have it be successful. Really, I mean, they start at 24 units and go up. So it probably wouldn't work very well. We do have the rural affordable rental housing program, which we just created a couple of years ago. That ran out of funding.
Right.
But the governor's budget has right now $30 million, 15 of which is going to be dedicated to the low-income housing tax credit program. And 15 million of it is going to be dedicated to the rural affordable rental housing program.
So that's the good program to tap for something like this.
To me, it's what makes the most sense for this area, because you can go as few as 5 units. And it's really a lot of subsidy for areas with low rents.
How much will get subsidized in the program?
I believe it's $185,000 a unit, up to.
Right.
So depending on how much you can get for bank debt.
I think the problem, so I was just doing back of the envelope calculations in the last few months of the problems that that I think we face here as being a DBA, like I think you and I talked about, a designated difficult area because it's so expensive to build here. You're talking about what, $350 a square foot, right? Is that kind of what you're seeing now?
Wow, that's really expensive.
That's more expensive than anything. What do you?
Yeah, we're really seeing between 2 and 3. I mean,
Between 2 and 3.
it's all over the place, and some people come to us with crazy ideas and they're really expensive, and we just say no.
Right.
But, I think in the middle 200s, it's really
Okay. No, that's
where recently we've seen projects completed.
great.
Now, what we have in the pipeline right now may end up being more expensive than that,
Right.
but I don't think we have to go as high as 350 and it really don't.
Okay. That's good to know.
Well, then, you finish? Then I'll apologize again.
No, that's okay.
Could you say to the meeting, though, because we kind of did it, we flipped it around, you could stay till the end.
Yeah, I can't stay too long, so I gotta get back to Southern Maine and there's a storm going in.
Oh, okay.
But I'm happy to be around for a few minutes and,
Well-
make sure I hand out some.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming all the way up here.
No, I'm happy to be here and, finding the design.
We certainly appreciate it. And now I think maybe we could go to
Marla.
Mallory O'Brien, the executive.
One question.
Was there, I think there was a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you rent these out, I know some of the low-income housing in Ellsworth that have been built over the last few years. It is partially, like you said, for the elderly and partially for a low-income family. And there are people in the apartments that rent these apartments and their rents are not subsidized. They're substantially higher than what. So do you have like an income guideline of people that can get in there, and how many of those are, like, how many apartments are gonna be based for the elderly, how many are gonna be low income, and how many are gonna be, I don't wanna say regular, it's long term, but people that can afford to pay the full burden.
So if we're talking about a low income housing tax credit project, it's going to be either for families or seniors for the most part. And everybody in there, really, unless you're in Portland or Lewiston, everybody in there is gonna meet the low income guidelines. And that's 50 or 60% of area median income. And I don't know what area median income is in Hancock County. You could look it up on our website. So I think there's a misconception about affordable housing that people who aren't working. Generally, it is people, all people are working, but they just don't make a lot of money. And they have to pay rent. They have to pay rent every month. As far as projects that have people who are not meeting the low income requirements, I really, if that's in Ellsworth, it's not something we fund.
All right, but the issue is that this is the way it is around Hancock County. No, I mean, we are Hancock County here. And so we fall under anything that happens in Hancock County as far as schooling, as far as lack of teachers, lack of public transportation living out here is huge for families in low income housing. So these are like all the infrastructure things that we are gonna need to really think about, can that happen here in order to build these apartments? I mean, you have people that live on the island in low income housing, elderly and the young, that do not have public transportation to where their housing is, nor do they drive. So, and getting them, you know, to doctor's appointments and things like that. I mean, it's definitely like a consideration that has to be thought about as we try to put housing in an area. Because if you don't have public transportation, it's not gonna work for a lot of these families.
Yeah, and that is up to the developers, owners and managers to figure out. Really, we're just here to provide the funding. We do have programs that are more competitive than each other, than others, and they might have a factor like proximity to activities of daily living. Those projects that have that, those amenities nearby will score better. We do try to do that as much as possible, but it's Maine. We have a lot of rural places. We actually have an islands initiative where we give outrageous sums of money to projects because it's so expensive to build on an island. And where we allow people like, oh, Uncle Jimmy's coming over with his tractor today to, you know, dig a hole, and we just kind of turn our heads and say, I hope it works out. I mean, Maine is it's a really diverse state, and we're just trying to find as many solutions as we possibly can. In the low income housing tax credit program, which sounds like that's what you're referring to, really doesn't work in areas like this very well. So we're trying to find alternatives, and the rural program is the best answer we have right now. And we're hoping to get more money for it soon. It sounds like we probably will.
Thank you, Matt.
You're welcome. I'm gonna do some different stuff up there.
Like Dan, I think that's what we go to. Mala, Dick was director, the housing trust, Mount Madrid Island. The Island Housing Trust is working to support other communities, but provided opportunities for year-round housing. There is 4 million households and buildings and average income working on Mount Madrid Island. Sounds like you might be able to answer a lot of the questions that are on our mind. We've been there and done it.
Well, that was great. So, thank you for introducing me. I don't have to start with what we do. I will just say that, people think of us as a housing organization, but we began to support our communities, and we saw that we really needed on NBI was housing where people could work and live. We have a hard time, as I'm sure you understand, recruiting people, retaining people. And with the pandemic, we've seen an even more exacerbated challenge of the few year-round rentals we had converting to vacation rentals and people moving up, you know, during the pandemic. Mount Desert Island has mixed population. We have the seasonal residents, we have the vacation rentals, we have seasonal workforce, and then the year-round renters, and so, or year-round residents. And so Island Housing Trust view is not that any one kind of housing is good or bad, but we need a balance to keep our community strong year-round. We came out of a community vision process called NBI Tomorrow in the early 2000s. We revitalized the employment organization so that we had our 501c3 and we could get started right away. We do all of our work in partnership. Our first project was developing a new neighborhood on the land donated by the town of Mount Desert. We have built 2 phases out of 3, so there are 9 houses in this neighborhood. We're just beginning planning for the final phase with another 10 houses coming in. We're finishing up a project that was a part of the project with Maine Coast Heritage Trust, where we bought a parcel that we gave the organization. MCHD bought 30 acres for conservation of significant wetlands, and IHT bought the uplands for workforce housing. There are 10 houses going in there. We have worked with donors who have donated a house That was a one-time effort. Because it is very difficult to move a house and have all the power lines but we were fortunate, we didn't have to move it much more than a couple of miles onto land that was also donated by the town. We have worked with people who want to sell their houses, but they want to make sure they go to year-round families and stay in year-round residency. So they've been willing to sell below the appraised value, and Island Housing Trust has been able to raise the money to then bring that price down farther, and we resell it. We'll buy it and then resell it for that. We put covenants on the houses that we work with, and there are deed restrictions that run with the property in perpetuity, so that when the owners come to sell their house, we have a formula that establishes how much they can sell the house for, and it's tied to changes in the median income. It allows for some improvements that we consider eligible, so the swimming pool wouldn't be. But, you know, improvements that make the house more habitable and are important to just the long-term existence of the house, we consider eligible. The covenants also provide a right of first refusal to Island Housing Trust, so we have that opportunity to buy it back if we think there's anything we need to do with the house. We have done that once, and that was because we were making an adjustment in covenants and we didn't want to bring a new owner into the midst of that conversation. So we just bought the house, we made the covenant changes, and then we sold it. We hold a secondary mortgage on the houses so that we have a tie to that property when it comes up for sale. And that comes up, you know, as title search and search goes. We have started moving. We originally worked with buyers selling the properties. We'd sell the land and the house. We have moved to a land lease model. If Island Housing Trust has any ownership in the property, we will hold ownership of the land and sell the improvements, which will include well and septic if they're on well and septic, the shed, the house, that sort of thing. And we did that because it gave us an additional sort of legal control of the house if anything happens, bankruptcy, foreclosure, that sort of thing. But also it reduces the cost to the homeowner, because they're not paying the property taxes for the land. They're only paying the house. So, you know, it had a twofold benefit that we saw for that. That's kind of roughly what we do. Well, there is one other program. The Homeownership Assistance Program was a tool we started in 2010, which helps homeowners. Hard to remember these days, but there were occasionally houses on the market they could just about afford. And often we found that the largest barrier was coming up with down payment. So we raised money to help with the down payments. We wouldn't pay for the entire amount, but we would put some assistance into that. And we have assisted 18 buyers that way and contributed over $500,000 to the purchase of those properties. And that contribution towards the purchase runs with the house. So when it comes up for sale, that amount is deducted from what they can sell the house for. So it's an ongoing means of keeping that price reduced. And we work with median income, as you had said, people who earn an average income on the island. Because when we looked at where the need was, we saw we have a housing authority which works with lower income. So there's state and federal assistance up there, and then we have people who could work in the market, but we saw there was this missing middle that didn't have any assistance. And so that's where we focused our energies.
How did you form the entity that runs all of this?
So it existed and it worked solely in the town of Mount Desert. It was called the Mount Desert Community Trust. They had done one project about 10 years before, and that was it. Then it just went dormant. We had two of the board members on our working group for workforce housing, and we talked about it, and they said, you know, they agreed, might as well revitalize this nonprofit, expand its mission to island-wide, because it doesn't make sense to work in one town. We have an island-wide issue, and people, cross those political boundaries every day to work somewhere to, so. And we, after a couple of years, we changed the name to Island Housing Trust.
Board, any other board questions? Bob?
Yeah, oh, no, you given some really good ideas, and I guess I'm more thinking, I like the sound of what you're doing with leasing the property, or so that you retain that control and a little bit of control, but a little bit of ownership of the property of the house, so they can't do wild and crazy things. I've been involved in a couple before in Southern Maine. It didn't work out that well, that we subsidized it to begin, but then it was a 60 home development, individual houses, and the 60 homeowners went to the board and convinced everybody that, oh, we gotta give us that money back so they could sell it, make huge profits. And
Oh, my.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was very excited with that, so. But that's what I don't want to see happen. Be involved with the Island Heritage Trust and some kind of model like what you have. But I think that's where we're trying to fit, is that gap in the middle. We have plenty of the people that have sold a very wealthy, you live in the southern part of the country and moved up here, and they can afford to buy an $800,000 house or even a $400,000 house. But the mom, the husband and wife and 2 kids that have fairly good jobs, they can't buy a house. They can't even find rental houses in this area because they just don't exist anymore. And that's the gap we want to see, or I'm very much in favor of seeing help and push. And that's where we're losing a lot of our community, is that, the houses from away and the weekly rentals or daily rentals, whatever they might be. Yeah, that's good business for a lot of people, but that doesn't provide us with a community. And I just fear that our community is waning a little because of what's happening with the housing.
Yeah.
And the prices, during this COVID thing is just gone crazy. I think 10 years ago, the houses that were for sale for 90,000 are now selling for 400 or 600, and it's just crazy. So that's my thoughts.
And those are important stories. We had a capital campaign that started in 2020. I mean, our time we thought it was the worst, but it actually turned out to be a good time because people were really thinking about where their values were, what they really believed in supporting, and we all needed our communities to get us through that. So during that capital campaign, we gathered a lot of stories because people need to hear, what does community mean? I mean, we all have our own sense of it, but just having those will help you, move forward.
Definitely, yeah.
How much did you raise? We raised, our goal is 3.5 million and we raised 375,000, I think. Yeah. It was very amazing, the response we got. Yeah.
Any other board questions? Any other audience questions? Yes, sir.
What's the difference, maybe you can discuss this a little bit, between creating a trust like you have versus like a housing authority? I mean, is there like a structural difference that allows you to do more?
Yeah, the housing authority on MDI and elsewhere, like quasi municipal. So that's as much as I know about that structure. It gets state and federal funding, and it has closer ties to government sources. But Island Housing Trust is a 501c3 nonprofit. And so everything we do is governed by the IRS 501c3 laws. And also, we have other requirements for how we manage our projects. But those are based with just regular zoning, but yeah.
You're governed by a board, I would imagine.
Yes.
So how do you as a organization decide what to do next? What's the process?
So we have been opportunistic, and it's wherever we could find a project. And then we spent the first, I'd say 15 years, doing one project at a time, because that's how we could raise the money to do it. And then we started gaining momentum, and the pandemic has been kind of a push for that. People are much more aware of the housing issue. So part of our effort has been made much easier. People know the story, they know the need. And so now it has been, what can we do? And we've had partnerships with Maine Coast Heritage Trust, as I said, with the towns. And the more success we've had, the more people have heard about us and we have more people coming to us. So now we're looking at doing partnership projects perhaps with the housing authority where we could start to look at rentals and they could do property management. That's always been our barrier to doing rentals. We just don't have the staff for it. We have 3 people. We have been meeting with landowners who know now that there is a possibility to sell their property and keep it year round, and we can help partner with them on that. We have older people, and this is the other thing we're just beginning to look at. Older residents who don't want their house to turn into just a vacation rental business. And so they're talking with us about how can we secure our house and still live here. So we're looking at life estates and different models where we can help people stay in their homes, but but help decide its future when they don't need it. Yeah.
Interesting, yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I'm wondering, someone said, maybe 20 to 50,000 units in the state. Do you have a sense of how many units MDI needs per?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. When we did our first housing study in 2004, the estimate was around 200 rentals and 200 homeownership opportunities. We did it again in 2018. It was kind of the same. Bar Harbor just did a housing study as part of their comp planning, and they said 500 to 600. Yeah. But we don't know. Those are just estimates.
Sorry, one more question on the mechanics of the study. Because I think that's something that we'll need to do here is how did you go about doing a housing study? Like, what's that process?
Yeah, so in 2018, which seems like a lifetime ago, we got together partners from the businesses and nonprofit organizations that have an interest in creating housing for their employees because they're struggling. So it's the larger employers on the island and the towns and some of the colleagues of the Atlantic. So we got together partners and we put out an RFP to consultants who do that type of work, and we had 3 or 4 and we chose one. And Bar Harbor did essentially the same thing. Yeah.
I might chip in here. A housing needs analysis would be really helpful to determining what kind of housing, what kind of problems you're having, what the demographics are, what the incomes are, and what you can do. That said, they're expensive.
Yeah, they are.
I think they do, I think they do with their own. Yeah, I agree. I think she'll be able to talk about that.
Yeah.
Later.
Yeah, hi, I'm Maggie from Island Workforce
Thank you
Housing.
so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and I brought our annual report is our campaign report. And it does give some summary of our projects and how we've done things, if anybody wants to do it.
Thank you. If we can, I'd like to go to Maggie Cook. He's on Zoom.
Hello, everyone.
The Island Workforce Housing in Deer Isle. And evidently, the mission is to create housing solutions in Deer Isle, Stonington that are permanently affordable to individuals and families working in these communities. Their first project is underway now, all over the bridge. They join forces with the Island Housing Trust to develop 5 house duplex buildings, 2 bedroom, 1 bath, 900 square feet. Town of Gouldsboro and the town of Stonington, Deer Isle have a lot in common, so I want to hear what you've got to say.
Well, thanks for having us here today. We are a little bit newer of an organization, really kind of got back together mid 2018. So this is our first project that we've built. And we got pretty lucky from the beginning. We have a summer resident who's a retired developer from Boston. He worked on low-income housing in Boston for a couple decades, and he went to MIT for real estate development and architecture. So he's got a lot of skills, in his back pocket. But he didn't have really kind of a pulse on the community or connection to all the local people. So we couldn't have done it without him, and he couldn't have done it without us, sort of thing. We were working with the town manager from Deer Isle and the economic developer from Stonington, the local surveyor, Linda Campbell, who's been on the island for 25 or 30 years, and she's knows every property, knows every person, you know, was very kind of instrumental in helping us figure out that part of it. Myself, I'm an architect in Blue Hill. And then we had Mike Wood, who was a retired teacher from Deer Isle, and he'd been, you know, he knew everybody and their parents and their children on the island. So it was really that group of 6 people that was why we were able to do what we did. I think, you know, there were a lot of other volunteers and people that were interested in figuring out, you know, how can we do something? Everybody knew it was a problem, but at some point we had to kind of get a small group of people that were all kind of ready to dive in and really commit their time and effort to it to figure out what to do. So we talked to Marla early on. We went to MDI and she talked to us about what they'd done and showed us one of their, you know, developments and really walked us through their recent experience. And we ended up getting a housing study, same process, put out an RFP, and ended up picking the same company that they had recently used. And I think we probably did a smaller scope of work just because we don't have quite we have a smaller summer crowd, I think, than MDI does, just because it's a smaller place. But we've felt like we could focus, you know, the studies efforts. And we did a lot of legwork ourselves. We, you know, we did a bunch of our own interviews and questionnaires. I think we, you know, got something like 120 responses from either individuals, businesses. We made a list of every island business, and Mike was retired and he just sat down and called them all and asked them all how many employees they had, how many did they need, how many more could they have if they had housing for them. Asked them, do they own housing already? A lot of people on Deer Isle, the businesses just bought their own housing because it was pretty cheap and they put people up themselves, but they were looking for a way to not have to be landlords so they could focus on running their businesses. So with all that kind of housing study in hand, we decided to focus on rental housing, knowing that it's like the most difficult type of housing to manage, but it was also felt like the most important type of housing that the island needed. We had at that time, at least, we had a lot of old single family homes that were on the market that you could purchase for a relatively low price. They had a lot of deferred maintenance, but they were livable if you had were willing to buy a lot of oil to heat them. So we focused on rental units, and kind of like Marla was saying, it was a little opportunistic. Shortly after deciding what to do, a piece of property came on the market, and we had a couple, early donors that were interested in helping us out, and they helped us buy the property right then. So we kind of had a piece of property, and then we had to figure out what, can we build on it and what can we do? We made a strategic plan. I think that was a big part of it. After we had that needs assessment, we probably spent 3 or 4 months meeting once a week to kind of draft this document that would outline what we wanted to do and how we thought we could do it. And, we've said that our plan was to create 30 units of housing in 3 groups of 10. So we created, Peter created a budget, for making those 10 units. And then he created like a sources and uses budget as well. Where can we get that money? How much of it is going to be fundraised, mortgage coming from the units, all of that stuff. So having that understanding from the development side was really critical to knowing if this was feasible, and then figuring out how much money we needed to raise. And then we did a capital campaign, pretty long, quiet phase, learning from some of our fundraising people that, those individual asks around to people are really the way that you raise money. You can send out a letter to everybody in the town, but it's not going to be as effective as those individual sit-down meetings with people, telling them, you know, requesting an amount for them to donate and seeing if they'll do it, and trying to, you know, figure out your donor pyramid, how many people you need at each level so that you can really reach that goal, because getting the last donations really rely on showing that you've already got a bunch of people that are behind you. So we had kind of a, you know, an event outdoors, but then in the middle of all this, we got COVID right in the middle of our capital campaign. So no more in-person asks, no more house parties with, you know, people convincing their neighbors to raise money. It just got down to emails and Zoom and phone calls. But we got to a point where we had hired an architect. We got the buildings designed, we got our subdivision application gone through the town, and we started building. I guess we started site clearing in the end of 2020. So we started, you know, the project's 2021, and they're still under construction. It's been a pretty slow process. There was a point, you know, when the foundations were done, but we hadn't started building the walls, and material cost prices had just gone through the roof. So the decision was, do we stop and raise a whole lot more money, or do we stop and wait till prices go down to continue building? And we chose to stop and wait till prices go down. It looks like maybe they'll be done by, I don't know, summer, which would be great. The other thing we decided to do to save money was to general contract the project ourselves, instead of paying that general contractor their fee for being on site and managing everything. That's a lot of work to take on yourselves. We're all volunteers. Most of us still work full time, and but that was a way to save money, and it just takes a little longer. But you know, we had some good, we made out a good video during COVID, and that was really helpful. One of our board members suggested to, you know, get out there, talk to people, and use a video to show the need. And we have a little bit of, we had some trouble getting people to come around at the beginning to the idea that this was like an important thing and it needed to be done. About, you know, there's a portion of the population on the island that really wants the market to handle these things. They don't want to give handouts. They want people to really work hard and, you know, make things happen for themselves. And we understand that desire, but we were finding that that wasn't happening. You know, the market had a lot of time to figure it out, and 15, 20 years later, it still hadn't. So, you know, we don't want to give handouts, and we want people to be proud of it. And so we're building, you know, things that are pretty nice, but hopefully they'll be an asset for the island for a long time, and give people a place to live for 2 or 3 years, save some money, and then they can, you know, use that savings to put a down payment on something for themselves.
Thank you very much. Very helpful.
Maggie, how are you gonna rent those? How are you gonna decide who gets to rent those?
Well, we've got a group of people that are, you know, landlords locally and well-known on the island, and they've got a little committee to come up with the preferences. So we're renting them to moderate income households. That's in our, we have a covenant on our property that says making between 60% and 120% of the area median income. On the island, we have low-income housing and we have elderly housing. So we're trying to get that unmet need, the people in the middle, just like you guys are talking about. So there's preferences. I think the first preference is if you work on the island, but you don't live on the island and you're commuting every day. So those people in the lottery would have a, you know, a high preference. And then if you work on the island, but you're what they call underhoused, which means you live with your parents, you live with a bunch of roommates, you live in a place that doesn't have plumbing in the summer, you know, that's a priority. And then if you live on the island and you're doing the shuffle summer and winter, that's a priority as well. So, you know, we're hoping that we're not super flooded with applications, but if we do, we can kind of figure out, okay, these are the people that have the highest needs right now. And as long as they fit in that income range, and they'll be eligible to move into them. They'll at the lease up every year, you'll kind of recheck all of those income ranges. You'll recheck that they're, still working on the island, that kind of thing. And as long as they're still in the guidelines, they'll be able to stay there. The rent is weighted depending on your income. So if you make, if you're at the low level of that income bracket, you'll have a lower rate of rent. And if you're at the higher side of that income bracket, you'll pay a more amount than somebody else. So we haven't gotten fully to that part yet, but they've mapped it all out and just trying to, have a sliding scale for what people can afford, because all the units are the same. But if you're making 60% of the area median income versus 120%, your, buying power is a lot less.
Is there any other board questions?
Yeah, so when you partnered with the Island Housing Trust, in what way did that help you? How did that work? Did they have the land and you went in with them, or how did that all come about?
Well, this piece of property is on a pond, and so it has kind of like a 250-foot setback for resource protection. So we split, they have a property in the resource protection area, since we couldn't build on it anyways, and they'll put, trails back along that side of things, and then we own the upland part of it, and that basically reduced the cost of the property for us.
So it's island heritage.
Yeah. And do you know roughly what the rental range will be, just ballpark?
I think it's what we were talking about before was like 700 to 1,200 a month. That's conversations that happened kind of in 2020. I think the landscape has changed a lot since then. So I think the asset management group will have to kind of get together again and see, what they think is affordable. Also, the area median income ranges have gone up and inflation. So it's a conversation I think we're going to have pretty soon now. 2 bedrooms, 900 square feet, they're nice, but they're not generous. So I think you could have, if you have the HUD guidelines determine how many people can stay there. So there's a possibility for a family with 2 children to stay there, but it depends on their age and their gender because of those guidelines, how it all works out. It's more likely to be 2 people or 3 people than 4, I think.
Is heat and electricity included then?
All the units are separately metered, and it's on all electric units. So the renter will pay for their electricity. We have a common septic system and common wells. So the electricity for well pumps and septics will be borne by us rather than the tenant, but their heat and stove usage will be theirs.
Yes, sir.
So look, on the housing units with them being all electric, were you able to integrate any type of solar in the new development?
We haven't yet. The hard part about solar when you're a nonprofit is that the tax credits aren't very useful to you. We've looked in a couple different ways of how could we have private entity purchase them so that they could realize the tax benefits while we had the panels. The last time we really talked about it was kind of simultaneously with the cost increases on construction. So as of now, we didn't do anything specific to wire for solar, but we did orient the buildings with the idea that they would be very good solar orientation if we got to a point where either we had a donor that specifically wanted to donate for that, or if we found a way to make the tax credit, useful.
So just the solar on itself without subsidy isn't cost effective.
It's, you lose that 30% tax credit. So you're not, getting that money back. It's just it's a bigger cost. And what we're hoping is just that the efficiency of the units, they have high insulation levels, hopefully, the electricity bills are going to be low enough. We had an engineer kind of look at it. I can't remember her estimation for utility bills. I think she said maybe like $75 to $100 a month per unit. So we felt pretty comfortable that that wasn't going to be a big burden on the renters. And that even without the solar, that we felt comfortable that we wouldn't be asking a lot from them. Because that is a big thing around here. The rent can be one price, but the utilities in the wintertime can be $400 or $500 a month. So it would be great to have solar, but right now we're just focused on getting the buildings done. And
The other question, the audience.
Congratulations. I just wanted to pick up on something Maggie said about, resistance to handouts. And that's something we've worked for years trying to switch that conversation, because it isn't about what they're getting from Island Housing Trust or Island Workforce Housing. It's what the community is getting from having people there. And it's a constant kind of reorientation that this isn't a handout. This is building our communities, right? We have someone who's providing first responder services, teaching our children, being in our medical centers, all of these different things that people bring to our communities.
yeah, I mean, the nursing home closed on Deer Isle, and a big part of that they attribute to not being able to hire people because there's no housing for them. The schools we've talked to over and over again, I think they told us they lost, 12 potential hires in 3 years because they didn't have a place. They had this one person that they really wanted. The person accepted the job. They came here for a weekend to find a place to live, and they couldn't find it, and they backed out of the job. And so I think those are the kinds of things that when we tell people about it, they really understand that this is what the community really needs.
Any other questions? Thank you, Maggie. This is incredibly helpful. I'm sure we'll be talking again as the time goes on.
Yeah, I know it's a lot to take in. It's a lot to think about. So, we're all trying to do the same thing. And there's a lot of us in the area doing that. North Haven, there's, IHT and MDI, there's the other group, Mount Desert 365. They're doing, partially some of these things and other things too. And I think for everybody, it's all about community. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, get to go, Bob DeForest, Maine Solidarity Trust Project Manager, Region and California. Bob, you were involved with the legal conversation with this, you probably got us composed on that. What can you add?
Well, as Marla mentioned, we partnered with Island Housing Trust on projects in the past, and we're sort of in the land business as far as figuring out land. And so we've been able to work in one of the examples that Marla suggested. There was a piece of land that was up for sale. We worked with the landowner to purchase it in combination with Housing Trust, and then the area that was the marsh area and buffer of that, we retained that as a preserve and provided upfront funding for that. And then the remainder that was closer to another budding subdivision that was partitioned off. We also helped out with some acquisition. There was a need for an additional land for having a better access into that subdivision or into the development. So we helped out with that as well as far as acquiring that. Down in Cutler, we worked with that where we've done a lot of work over the years ago, back in the 70s, 80s, and we're looking for help from her days of Maine Conservative Trust that we worked with just recently, giving 200 acres to the town of Cutler. That's sort of been land banked for years as a possible potential future development site. We also worked with another example with Bar Harbor Housing Trust, the Bar Harbor Housing Trust, with the Housing Authority, sorry, with the we had a project with the Fuller Farm. That was a piece that we did a conservation and combination with them building housing units on it. So I think that there's potential. We're definitely not looking to drive the process, but I think there's ways that we can partner, and it's definitely something that we're interested in seeing, healthy communities, and seeing ways that we can help and partner. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
Questions, Bob?
You have land on the Scotia Peninsula?
I know it's sort of ironic that I'm bringing this, like, we had an earlier conversation about a piece of 1,700 acres, that was donated to us, and that piece was donated with restrictions on what we could do with it. And as Select Board and Dana, we've had, and Eve have had conversations in the past that that restriction, that land came with a restriction that couldn't be turned over into development. The property in itself is somewhat problematic from a development standpoint. There's only one entrance along one way, and the other entrance, when you look at the Gouldsboro end, that is a very steep incline and elevation to get in there. So it was problematic, lots of wetlands in that property. So
Is that the piece across from Scotia?
yes, piece north of Scotia. Right now, there are a number of our properties have wetland or restrictions on them from our funding sources, where they can't be developed. We've tried to focus a lot of our lands sort of in the riparian areas and away from the roads, and protecting those wetland corridors, and avoid a lot of the road frontage, and definitely staying out of the village areas, especially any place that might be closer to utilities and things like that. So we're really trying to be mindful about those aspects of what we can serve. I could see a potential of, as we do work on protecting wetlands, where it'd be protecting the wetland and then providing an opportunity and partnering on the road frontage for there to be housing closer to where the utilities are. It'd be cheaper instead of a long winding driveway back to, a long narrow piece of land. So I think there's potential there. I don't have anything right now to offer up as far as a property, but I think that there's opportunity out there. And part of that could be the combination, as Marla mentioned, is that if there's a piece of land for sale that has conservation value, we could potentially provide some funding for protecting and the areas that are less suitable for development, and then split the cost on acquiring a piece of land that can be then partially developed. Yeah.
Questions for Bob? Yeah, I haven't had anybody chime in. Is any Zoom questions out there? Quite amazing. So I will say this is an incredible workshop, because we've kicked this conversation, this idea around for a long time, and the amount of information, and Jackie's had on bringing these people together, and thank you very much. The amount of information that we've gathered here tonight is incredible for me, and I think having digested this for a day or two, I'm sure we're going to try to take this to the next step. And thank you all very much for your input and for coming, and I'm hopeful that in my old age we work together and leave something that will be better for the next generation. Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Yeah.
I want to go back to what you were thinking about just a little bit, which was the low income. Because we are rural, there are so many challenges, Locarno, and also city center. When that fell through, the 20 acres in the back fell through and wasn't developed by Mayfair Great Lobster, they did the trailers up here, the little trailer, as you turn, let's go up the corner, as you go through the curve, which now I think probably need to be torn down, but I remember people living in those, the workers, and they were walking up to the grocery and walking back, and it was so difficult. So it's not just you know, I mean, it's the whole city center. I just think that low income housing and all the requirements needed because of the lack of resources that they have to meet their needs is really hard. So I'd love to hear at some point any suggestions to do that on that or.
City busing is huge. Absolutely huge to the survival of these people. And, for people that are making $20 an hour and their wife is working part-time because they need to be home with their children rather than putting in non-existent daycare. In the Hancock County area, we've had another one, I want to say through DCP that's going to be closing very soon. I don't know, I've heard that today. I don't know how true that is. But it's an absolute nightmare for these people. I will tell you some of the housing complexes in Ellsworth that I'm aware of really well. They're within, Oriole Way is right behind Shaw's, makes it very easy. It's very close to the urgent care and the hospital. They're right in between those two things. You have access to taxis in Ellsworth. You don't have access to that out here. And that's my concern. I mean, I think it's a wonderful idea to find housing for people and to try to create this project, but you really have to think about all of those little pieces that can cause this whole project to fail for the people that are going to be living.
Can I just add one thought to that? I think that the interesting thing with housing is always, especially in a rural area, what you're trying to address is not bringing low-income housing people to an area. They're here. We're here. They're making it happen. So I think the idea that it should really only exist in a place like Ellsworth because they have transportation and the infrastructure is not, we can't do that. I think the reality is you have low-income people living on Schoodic Peninsula and we need to provide housing for them. No matter if there isn't a bus service, they figure out how to get around. I pick up guys walking from the IGA, going up to their place in Goldsboro all the time to give them a lift. They figure it out. And I think the reality is we're not going to solve every issue, but I think that the conversation has to be around developing housing resources for low income, medium income, worker housing. It all has to happen or the peninsula will collapse because, you know, the reality of the economy here is it's all interdependent. And so I think, you know, it's a great point and in a perfect world, absolutely, you'd have all the resources needed to help them with every aspect of their life. But the biggest issue is housing.
Right.
And I think we have to have it.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that, you know, Ellsworth has all of the housing because, yeah, they have city water and sewage. That makes a huge difference for these people building these, you know, 14, you know, apartments in one little complex. But there are these people, no matter whether they receive housing, low-income housing or median housing, or, you know, they can pay all of it. They need a way to get back and forth to work, to make money, to buy food. Food stamps doesn't cover it, whether you're the elderly or not. I mean, and we know this in the community. I mean, if you look at our food pantry that we now have, that is serving tenfold what they used to serve 6 months ago. I mean, that's crazy. And these are people of all ages that attend this. So, I mean, that's just one example, you know. I mean, Ellsworth has a huge food pantry, you know, and I see this every day. And I see the problems that are in the communities, even with the communities that have public transportation and city sewer. Like you said, these people do need houses. They're living in tents with children in the middle of winter. It's disgusting. I mean, I'm totally for doing something, but there's a lot of pieces to it which you have to encompass into the whole project, because if you don't, the project is gonna fail.
Well, I think, I'm not disagreeing with the thing you're saying, but I don't see throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
That's what I'm
I
saying.
think we need to come together and consider all of these things. There is low-income housing, there's workforce housing, and there's just plain housing for people that have got cars. So I think if we go forward, all of these things come into play. And that's speaking for myself, if this goes forward, it's a long-term thing, but speaking for myself, if we can do something to help the area, the community, whatever your pay level is in the community, just because we don't have a bus, I'm not going to stop there. But I was,
Suggesting.
I know.
I'm suggesting you need to consider that as part of the project.
Maybe that, yes, sir, this gentleman has to think about it.
Brenda?
Yeah.
And last name is,
CLOUGH.
well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
One thing that people haven't mentioned, and it's not, I don't know what level, for a waiter or for people that will be here year round or maybe seasonal. I've been trying to pay more attention, and I've been reading about people renting out rooms or business owners arranging for rooms. And if anybody know Judy Maines? Okay, she was trying to get somebody to live with her, and she had the perfect space. I mean, sometimes a room, and we haven't mentioned that it could be the great transition. Maybe it's only 6 months, maybe it's 2 years or whatever, but
Sure.
so there needs to be a register of places like that.
Yes, sir.
So I now have two comments. The first one is, this is obviously a very complicated question. And yes, if you're going to house all demographics, there are lots of things you need, transportation, close to services and those things. I think a step in any direction towards providing housing to maintain and build community. As Steve had mentioned, there are people that need a lot of help, but they are living here and they are getting around somehow. So taking that first step, and then as you have accomplishments and you start building some housing for those people, then maybe you do look at the next steps of infrastructure or whatnot, but it's an incremental thing. You gotta take the first step. And to the point about rooms and whatnot, are you guys on track with LB 2003? That is
What is it?
LB 2003 is a law that is in rulemaking now. It's actually in with the Attorney General's office to make sure that it's all legal. It's going to go out to public comment in another 4 to 6 weeks. And then be revised by the Department of Economic and Community Development is charged with this. And July 1st, it is the thing that they call it the mother-in-law law apartment. So anybody, regardless of zoning in this town and any other town in the state, can put up to 4 units on their property with certain restrictions. And it might be a room in your house. It could be a separate house in the backyard, but zoning has to address this. It's going to be law July 1st.
July 1st.
They call it mother-in-law.
Actually, it's additional dwelling units, and I think it actually supersedes all local zoning.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, zoning doesn't matter, I think we'll be able to do it. I think it supersedes local zoning.
I got just,
It depends on what we
before we break up, I've got just one question I want to go back. Maybe Bob can help me with this, or whoever. We live on a peninsula, there's 2 towns on this peninsula. And we have everything in common, and then we have adjoining towns to the north of Route 1, right? And so my question is who can help me with the idea of if Grove decided we're going to go forward with this, and the other towns on the peninsula may want to go forward with it, is it some mechanism where we can come together as 2 or 3 communities in an area to make this thing happen? And no, I mean, the guy, Matt, it seemed to think it was feasible, but a lot of things I would have thought, I've had here tonight that I didn't think it possible are happening already. I mean, can you help me out, somebody on this? Maybe the young lady from Thornton. Oh, well. Is it
I had a hard
something-
time hearing your question. Could you repeat it real quick?
Well, my question is, obviously, GoPro is interested in this, but is there some way, some mechanism or some benefit for a couple of communities to come together, like Stonington and Deer Isle seem to be on board with what you're doing? And those are 2 different communities. So I guess what I'm saying, should we try to bring in our neighboring communities in the general area to go forward with this? Is that a benefit or no?
You know, it gets tricky when there's a lot of people at the table, but if you find the right people in your neighboring towns, then that could make a difference, you know? There might be somebody that's really has a certain skill in one town and you get together with them, and if you're close enough, you know, you 2 can get it done. I mean, for us, it would, since we're not doing any low-income housing, there's just no money available. So we had to figure out what we wanted to do, how we wanted to do it, and raise the money. And we, you know, Deer Isle and Stonington are on the same island. Everything happens, you know, pretty much together, and the town government's separate. We have more support from one of the towns than the other in terms of the select board. But I think if you're close enough and, you know, you're serving the same communities and it's helpful for both towns, you could definitely do it. We had one issue with the school. We have a shared school between the 2 towns, and the taxes that each town pays is dependent on how many students are coming from which town. And one of the, you know, the 2 towns were concerned that one town or the other was going to be paying a larger share of the school money at the end of the year. So we're trying to build our first group of housing in Deer Isle, and then the second plan would be to be in Stonington to try and help balance that, you know, burden on each of the towns. But I say, if you find the right people and they're ready to, you know, really get down to business and work on it, then I think it's okay to work with people nearby. There's people on our peninsula, Blue Hill, Castine, Penobscot, Brooksville, Brooklyn, they're all trying to get together now. I haven't been able to make it to one of their meetings yet, but they're in the same boat. They're smaller towns and they're a little further apart, but they want to kind of share resources so that they're not all trying to do the same thing.
So Island Housing Trust came from, you know, community members who created the nonprofit. But I do know a couple of people. We had the benefit of having University of Maine Cooperative Extension community planner working with us. And I do know there are a couple of people that I can send you names, and they might be able to help you convene these discussions.
Yeah.
To decide kind of the structure or the direction. And I know that Maine Community Foundation has a community building grant, and their deadline is February 15th. And they are looking at projects like this that really build the community. And this, you might be able to get some funding just to help start that process. So I can send you those links. I'll send them to Jackie. Okay.
Yeah, you know, Marla, I think we got a $10,000 grant from the community building to do our needs assessment, and that was a big part. So we only had to raise maybe $4,000 or $5,000 instead of the 14 or whatever it was at the time, and that was a good grant to get.
Was that for the study, the 14 or 15,000?
Yeah, I don't know if I have those numbers right. I could look it up at some point, but I just know that that was a big chunk of it, and it made it seem like, okay, we could probably raise the rest of that if we're work really hard.
Yeah.
Well, this has been an incredible workshop, and we need, I heard February 15th, maybe we need to work on this a little bit quicker than I. But I think it's, the board, this board will definitely, I think everybody's interested in what went on here. So, I think at this point, the board of selectmen and the town of Groove would like to thank you all for your input. Trust me, you haven't heard the last of us. But we use your board of place to, I think, to work forward and achieve something that's very good. Thank you all, and thank the public and all those on
Oh,